So you also talked about this in the classroom. And you also, so you know what, let's just dive into each room. You said bedroom, we talked about that because of relationships. You talked about classroom, and you also talked about the what was the other one called that you called it?
Boardroom.
Boardroom. There you go. Cause I'm about to say, I know you talked about the job, but I couldn't remember what you called it, but boardroom. So let's talk about the classroom, because so many times our children of color, right, are labeled unruly or unmanageable or mentally retarded or whatever. They don't use that word anymore, but they did when I was growing up.
They did. Yeah.
And but I think it, well, no, not I think, I know in a lot of cases, it's nothing to do with that. It's a bad day where the child wasn't able to communicate. So can you talk about this emotional intelligence inside the classroom?
Absolutely. So even before addressing the adults in the classroom, addressing the youth and all the different developmental factors that come in different age groups in life, right? There are different priorities in each of our brains at different times. So when you're in middle school, you really are just trying to establish taking the stringent rules from childhood of that's a yes, that's a no, that gets me in trouble, and then trying to add authenticity and individuality into it. And simultaneously, there are the adults in your life telling you, you are this, you aren't that, you look like this, you don't look like that. And based off of what you look like, these are the things available to you. So as a child, especially as a young child of color, it is so overwhelming, all this information. I can't imagine what it's like being a young child of color coming up with phones and internet the way that it is right now, because it was already overwhelming when we didn't have access to all of this.
Right.
So your mental health and the things that you're thinking of are things that in 2022, you could be a sixth grader thinking of things that a senior in high school would have been thinking of. But the teachers and the adults in these classrooms are still expecting these students to behave the way that they, the adult, did when they were in middle school.
Correct.
And it's just a completely different ship right now. It's a completely different planet. So when you have an adult who is not emotionally intelligent themselves, not self-aware, not clear on how to self-regulate themselves, not fully empathetic because they're burned out as a teacher, they don't feel like they're compensated enough, and they're with children all day. And then you have a child who, in some aspects of their maturity, is involved in stuff they don't need to be involved in yet. And in other aspects, they're not well nurtured in self-regulation. You end up attracting the same frequency. And that's why we have these battles in classrooms where it's really ego. It's a child's ego that's developing, and it's an adult's ego who's never been put in the proper place, going off the same energy and the same frequency. And that's why you have so many adults fighting kids nowadays, because that child spoke to the adult's inner child in a way that the adult was not ready to have addressed, and they regressed backwards. So that's where, to me, a lot of the classroom concern comes from. It's not just the development of our youth. That is something that I find very fascinating. It's also the lack of support and development of the staff who are in charge of these youth.
You're going to have to dive in a little bit more when you talk about the lack of support for the teachers. What does that, so you could say that, but what does it look like to have support? What does it look like to be, you know, in an ideal world, what does the right teacher look like in the space dealing with a child that may not have all the tools to express themselves properly? What does that look like?
Community. That's the quickest answer I can give you. That community. In the schools that we've worked in Fort Worth ISD a lot, and Everman, they often are struggling because there are directives that are handed down to them, and then they're left in this silo to figure it out. They might have other teacher conferences where they're trying to brainstorm together to help a student, but they don't have time to do that. They are in survival mode over trying to meet a certain outcome when it comes to test scores. So they're not even given the ability to learn these individual children the way that it would require for them to help them as individuals. They're on this track that is pushed down from districts to get these high SAT scores, get these high test scores. And the idea is no child left behind, but they're going to get left behind if your focus is on the outcome of test scores and not the retention of understanding. And what we know is that anytime you are learning something, no matter what age you are, and someone does not make sure that a fundamental part is clear, then everything you learn on top of that, you don't trust, because you know you don't know this first fundamental part. And there are so many children, because of the lack of community that teachers have, that are missing fundamental parts. That's why when they graduate, they're like, I still don't know how to do this. I still don't know how to do that, because it did not click for them. So when I talk about support for teachers, them having more planning periods, them having more support from even the parents of these students, because sometimes teachers are taking on the role of parents now because parents are very emotionally absent themselves. And there's not enough time to make sure a kid understands basic arithmetic. You think there's time to raise them in this classroom too? So that's what we run into with the emotional intelligence in classrooms.
Wow. Wow. I want to say thank you, because I've never even considered the lack of support for teachers. I knew they wasn't paid enough, but I never considered the lack of support community wise and so on and so forth. So thank you for that. That's an excellent perspective.